It's my great pleasure today to welcome Al Lopez back to Owen. He's a 1999 graduate. Had a very successful career, and we're looking forward to some time together this afternoon. Al, we've a room full of students and guests and friends who we're going to treat you nice, and we promise we won't ask too many mean questions. Al did warn me that if he doesn't like a question I ask, he's going to answer it in Spanish, so I'll need a little interpretation. So welcome back.
Thank you, Jim.
I appreciate you being here.
Happy to be here.
Early life beginnings, you came from the Honduras. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got to America?
Boy, that's going back. Jim, it was 1977. My brother and I have a brother that's 2 years older. We come from a very small town in Honduras where we grew up. And all of a sudden we're landing in Southside Chicago. So it was a big wake-up call. You know, there was a lot of things that were very exciting to us. Electricity was one of them. Cars. We had never seen so many vehicles in our life. There was a phone in the house. We did not know how to use a telephone. This is 1977. So we were in awe about a lot of things. But there were also some negative experiences. You know, we were beaten black and blue the first week that we were in Southside Chicago because all of a sudden we realized that we were not the right skin color and we didn't speak any English. So it was a quick wake-up call that taught us, early on street survival and how to move ahead quickly or you're not going to make it. So I was telling Jim earlier today, I think it was a good way to build some character.
A hard way to build some character.
Probably not the most preferred way, but nonetheless a good experience. We made it through it and made the best of it. So it was exciting, and some things were a challenge to us.
You made it through high school. I think you enlisted in the Army in high school. Is that right?
That's correct. You know, where I went to high school, going to college was not a topic of conversation for many folks. It was about survival, and then the military was a good option, and it was something I always wanted to do. So sophomore year, I was already enlisted in the U.S. Army.
And you, I think, started training for Special Forces, and you were going to make a career out of that. Is that right?
That was my dream, but made it to boot camp, into infantry school, and then I was going to go into airborne school and Special Forces. Had an unfortunate accident. I fractured my left forearm. Compound fracture, so I could no longer fulfill my contract to go Special Forces. So I remember the company commander telling me, he said, Alphabet, you got two options. You can stay in as a mail clerk, or you can get out with an honorable discharge. And
so now why did they call you Alphabet?
In our culture, we carry our mother's maiden name as our last name, right? So mine is Lopez Alvarado. How many can pronounce that?
A couple, yeah.
So, and I wanted my name tag to read that way, so nobody could pronounce it, so Alphabet was the easy way.
So what did you take away from that military experience? You were just honorably discharged, you left the military. What impact did that have on you? What did you take away?
It was a huge takeaway for me. I'm 18 years old. It's what I always wanted to do. My entire life was to be a professional soldier, and the dream is shattered. I feel guilty. I feel like I have failed. But it taught me, my big takeaway was, when a door closes, Jim, you got to go out there and open many others. And, looking back, it was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me. And
the next door was a factory job?
It's a factory job in Southside Chicago. I was hanging out with my buddies again. Life was good. I was, again, 18 years old, making a lot of money. I think it was $9+ an hour.
That's a lot of money, I have to admit that.
And I thought I had the world figured out, and that was going to be my career.
Right. And did something motivate you to not stay there, or what took you out of the factory floor?
Well, two things. One, I was blessed with a foreman who kept saying, Lopez, you have a head on your shoulders, you ought to go to school. But, again, I didn't know anything about college, and back in those days, to me, college was for kids that were born with a silver spoon in their mouth. Mm-hmm. It was just not part of my world.
Right.
But then my stepmother was a CPA, or is a CPA, and I overheard her talking to a friend one time, and her friend had gotten a promotion and was making $30,000 a year. And I figured, boy, if I can go to college, become an accountant, and make $30,000 a year, life will be good.
That's all the money in the world right there.
That's right. and that got me started.
Right.
You know, that took me to a junior college, and I was working full-time, going to school part-time. And
Did working the factory floor, did that leave an impression on you that you still use today? Does that experience still speak to you as far as how you've handled your career?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jim. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I quickly learned on the factory floor was to hate the suits. That's what we called it. About once a month, management would walk the factory floor. And everybody would say, here come those SOBs, and can I say that?
I think this is a mature audience. I think they're going to be okay.
Bill told me to say that. And for some reason, the workers disliked management, and they called them the suits. And you know, you follow the crowd, so all of a sudden I disliked management. I didn't know why. But later on, you know, I connected the dots, right? Management never bothered to talk to the hourly worker. They would just simply walk the floor in their fancy suits, and in a way we felt that we were looked down upon. And you know, we're human beings, Jim,
right.
You know that.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't matter what job you hold, you want to be recognized for what you're doing. And in those days, that management group failed to do that, and that's why they were hated by the group. Take that forward into my career, one of the things I like to do in any leadership role that I have is engage everyone in the company, whether you're an hourly worker or a senior leader. You know, if you're an hourly worker, I go out of my way to try to show you and make you feel that you play an important role in the success of that company, that company depends on you. And when people see that and realize that, it's a wonderful thing.
You tell a story about, I'm going to flip forward and I'll come back to the accountant years, but I just want to reflect on what you said. You talked to me about, you were working at Blair, and tell us a little bit about Blair. What's Blair?
Blair's a retailer, direct marketing space. Average customer, she's about 65 years old, and it's a company that sells about $500 million a year.
Okay, and you were CEO there? I
was CEO there. I went in as Senior VP, CFO, and Chief Operating Officer, and later on promoted to the CEO.
So you told a story about an all-hands meeting one morning, a little bit about calling everybody in. And why did you call everybody in, and what was that about?
You know, one of the things that I challenge my teams with is always know your business, right? So if I'm selling suits at Blair, what am I wearing, team? I'm wearing the Blair product, right? Because I want to see how it styles, you know. So one day I ordered 3 suits.
He now works for Armani, or owns Armani, I think.
So one day I ordered 3 suits, and I get them at my house, and I'm putting the suits on. They're all the same size. None of them fit me. Okay, so it's very early in the morning, and I called my admin assistant. I said, call an emergency meeting. I want everybody in the boardroom, you know, all the senior leadership. And I made a big deal about the suits not fitting me. And, you know, I started to get some reasoning, which was really what I call noise. No, the bottom line is, if you know your business, you got to be trying on your product. You got to make sure that when the customer receives it, he is going to be very happy with that product. So, and to the audience here, you know, as you're out there interviewing for a job or something, if it's for a company that's making cups, you know, make sure that you have gone out and see how that product is displayed on the shelf. Make sure that you have bought that product and you put water on it and you nuked it and see if it held, you know. Don't go in there with the theory. You know, I challenge you to go out there and really get familiar with the product. It was something that worked for us very well at Blair.
But as a follow-on to that story, I guess, their knowledge of their business and their ability to solve the problem was part of what you were trying to get them to focus on. Is that right?
That is exactly right, Jim. And, you know, I was blessed. Blair had a wonderful team of people there with very high tenure, 28 years, 36 years with the company. I mean, they really knew that business a lot better than I was ever going to know it. Right. So if you just, you know, first of all, made them believe in themselves that they knew how to fix that business, and then, you know, guided them a little bit, they ran with it, and in the end, those folks turned that business around very quickly.
we only have to go back 10 years or so, maybe a little more than that, to look at the fact that you did become an accountant, and you worked for this little accounting firm when they were a big 8 accounting firm called Coopers & Lybrand, I believe. Is that right?
That is right. I think we were the 4th largest accounting firm in the world back in those days.
And they're gone, right?
They're gone.
But you did become an accountant. You did go to school.
Yes.
And how long did you stay doing that?
Close to 4 years. You know, I became a CPA, and it was a great experience working for CNL. You know, you got exposed to different industries, manufacturing, non-for-profit, hospitals. It was great.
And so you stay there 4 years, and something motivates you. You've made this $30,000. I mean, you're the richest man we know of, right?
That's right.
And so you've made this $30,000. What motivates you to leave the accounting world?
Well, you know, back in those days, and that's going back here, Jim, I figured out at Cooper's that I could do a lot more than be an accountant or be an auditor.
Right.
All of a sudden, you know, I had figured out that somebody...
With no disrespect to auditors and accountants.
No, none whatsoever, you know. But I figured out that I could play in this game.
Right.
If somebody with my background had an opportunity to do something. So I started to, you know, put other goals in front of me. And Sara Lee Corp., which was headquartered in Chicago, and I think we're about $28 billion in size back in those days, was looking for some bilingual, bicultural folks, and through a recruiter, I got to them and I made the transition. It gave me the experience that I was looking for of working abroad. You know, at Sara Lee, I was going to be doing deals, M&A work in Europe, in Latin America, in the States. It was a phenomenal experience.
So how did you, you must have made some, you just talked about you knew you wanted an expat job or a work abroad job. Did you have a game plan? Did you rise up one morning and say, you know, I need to get these experiences to move ahead? Did you think about that?
That's another great question. The answer to that is yes, but back, you know, when I joined Sara Lee, I didn't have a game plan on black and white. I had told my wife before we married, you know, I said, babe, one day we're going to live outside the U.S. So we will work outside the U.S. Are you okay with that? She's like, yeah, you know, if it's good for the family, I'm fine with it. So I went to Sara Lee with that mindset, but it wasn't until 1995 or 1996 that I was, by then, Chief Financial Officer, that for the first time, Jim, I put on black and white a game plan on how to become a CEO and what were the critical steps that were needed for me to achieve that goal. And it was challenging. It was challenging. And, you know, let me ask a question to the crowd. How many of you have in black and white your career plan?
Bill Christie does over there, I saw.
You know, if you take anything away from this little talk here, please, you know, I beg of you and I challenge you, put it down in black and white and put a timeline. If you're working with this great company today and you say, by the year, you know, 2015, I want to be in a CEO job, and you don't get there, then make a move. Guys, don't sit there and rot away. You know, there's got to be a reason why you didn't get there, right? So go make it happen somewhere else. If you're not going to make it happen there, go make it happen somewhere else. But put it in black and white. It'll be a great exercise for you, believe me, and you'll benefit from it. So
you talk a little bit about these, you know, game plans, but I think life brings experiences at you sort of one at a time, maybe more than one at a time. But your migration out of public accounting to Sara Lee was through somebody finding you, wasn't it? Is that right? And you sort of qualified and convinced them that you were the right person, and they sent you off to Mexico.
That's correct. Well, first, I went from world headquarters to Sara Lee had a big processed meat business, and that headquarters was in Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay.
So my first daughter was born in December of 1994, and my wife we had built our first house throughout the pregnancy, and by February of 1995, we're relocating to Memphis, Tennessee. Still did not have the driveway in our new house yet, and the baby's a couple of months old, right? So we go to Memphis, Tennessee first.
And your wife's real happy about this, I know. This is just...
You know, she was happy about it. My mother-in-law is not to this day, because she's still in Chicago. And 11 months later, from Memphis, Tennessee, we're being shipped out to Mexico for, you know, what started out to be a 3-year expat assignment and ended up almost being 5 years.
Wow. And then did you come back to the United States with Sara Lee, or did you migrate somewhere else?
You know, that's a great question. And again, about that career plan team, I was working in a joint venture in Mexico, and we had 49% ownership, and our Mexican partner had 51% ownership. And the Mexican partner would always have the right to select the CEO for that company. So I knew I was tapped out at the CFO role. So I forced a move on myself. Sara Lee was very comfortable with me being in Mexico.
Right.
So I went out and I hired my replacement, because Sara Lee could not find a replacement in the world for me. So I went and hired actually a colleague from the IEMBA class from Ecuador, and I put him in the chair and I said, Sara Lee, I'm available.
For the audience, the IEMBA class was an MBA program that existed for several years in the 90s and was taught in Miami, Florida.
That's correct.
And recruited a lot of South American and North American and Central America representatives to attend and get their MBA there.
Yes. So I came back to the States, then you know, Sara Lee found an opportunity for me. I became a group CFO for Latin America, and we were headquartered in Boca Raton. But I went from the food business to now the apparel business. So I transitioned product lines completely.
Right. And was that a difficult transition for you at all?
You know, if you ask my boss, he'd probably say yes, but my answer is no. You know, in the leadership game, Jim, if it's working on one industry, you know, you can carry it forward to a completely different industry. And I made that move a couple of times and proven to.
What was the first CEO appointment you had?
The official CEO title was Blair Corp, you
Okay.
know, and it was publicly held, so it was the whole experience.
And that was what your game plan was? You
Yes.
wanted that experience?
Absolutely, and I was searching for it. You know, I had a great experience at Dole Corporation, but we privatized Dole, this $5 billion company. So I left the company because it became private. I went to Russell Corporation in Atlanta. Russell was publicly held.
Right.
And some colleagues of mine from Sara Lee were there in senior positions. So went and worked with them for a while. And then Warren Buffett came and bought Russell out. So through Fruit of the Loom, Russell became a privately held company. So a recruiter called about the Blair opportunity, and I pursued it.
Right. And what was, as you went into this CEO job, what were you surprised by? Was there some part of the job that was easier than you expected or harder than you expected?
You know, I was so eager to put so many things to work, Jim, and it was a lot of fun. You know, I don't know about easier, but certainly something that I always wanted to do and had an opportunity to do there was engage every single individual in the company to do what was right for the business. And I found out that people are willing to listen and they care about their business. If you're, you know, forthright with them and you speak their language, you know, they'll run through brick walls for you. And it was a great experience.
Where did the Owen experience fall in this continuum we've talked about? When did you decide that you wanted an MBA, and how did that come about?
It was 1996 when I put that career plan in black and white.
Right.
An MBA was a critical step for me. And it was there, and I went to my boss, and she agreed that it was a key step, and then they sponsored me for it. So it was a big sacrifice for the company and for me and my family. I was in Mexico, so I used to travel every 4 weeks, you know, back and forth, and we were dealing with the Maxi devaluation in Mexico. We were also doing some acquisition work in Mexico. My second daughter was born in Mexico during that time, so it was challenging. It was fun.
So how did Owen influence you? How did Vanderbilt influence you in your career and maybe what you learned here besides the finance class? So.
I thought I knew finance until I met Bill, you know. It was an extremely positive experience. And, you know, more than the technical learning, it was sort of confirming some of the things that I was already doing out there, Jim, and the fact that our class was full of experienced executives from different parts of the world. You know, we had people from Europe, from Italy, from Brazil. I mean, that was very enriching experience. The dialogues we would have were phenomenal.
Right.
And proved out to be very helpful for me. No question about it.
Do you still keep up with some of those folks?
Yes. As a matter of fact, you know, my best friend today is an individual that went to class, that went through a program with me together. He lives in Italy, by the way.
Does he need the dean to visit him in Italy? You think that maybe a good
He
thing?
probably liked that, Jim.
Talk a little bit about, and then I want to see if we have some questions from the audience, but talk a little bit about, you get to Blair, you've accomplished a lot in your career, and what was your ambition at Blair? What did you have? What was your vision when you got there?
You know, that's a great question. The first task was we needed to turn the company around. The company was losing money, and they had tried to bring some outsiders in, and things were not working out the way they should. So the board, you know, felt that a major change was needed, and the first thing was get this company back into profitability. So unfortunately, I had to downsize the business. That was the first thing, which means, you know, de-hire a lot of people, shut down some facilities, some excess capacity that we had, and I realized quickly, you know, the importance that Blair had in the town, right? Blair is one of the largest employers in Warren, Pennsylvania.
Right.
So anything that happened at Blair would impact the hospital, would impact the church, would impact the local bar. So you had to work with the outside leadership of the community to make sure that, you know, we were doing things and considering the ramifications of everything. On top of that, the deal came. You know, somebody came after us. Nobody wanted to sell the company. Certainly, I did not want to sell the business, Jim, and unfortunately, we had to sell the business. It was in the best interest of the shareholders for us to sell the business at that point in time.
And how far into your stay did that happen?
I had been with the company 6 months when I started negotiating this deal. It wasn't something that I wanted to do, so that was very hard. And I'll tell you, I think one of the biggest challenges that I've had in my career has been that. I stared fear in the face many times in the Blair experience because of the impact that this company had on the town. I mean, you're talking about 1,800 families depending on you and your team making the right decisions. And our board was very concerned about that. I was very concerned about that. And we made sure that in the merger agreement, we did the right thing for everybody. It was an experience like I never had before. We'll
come back to that fear factor in a second. I want to see if there were some questions from the audience that someone might have. Yes?
I read that before you, all the executives at Blair were homegrown. They had risen through the ranks. And I'm curious to know, coming in as a stranger, how you positioned yourself as a leader.
You know, that's a great question. I was the first outsider to come into the company at that position, and certainly the first one with an accent and a tan, you know, which I almost lost because of the snow that we got up there. But, you know, it was an easy transition. One of my habits when I walk into a leadership position is I present myself with a couple of PowerPoint slides to the folks, and then I have one-on-ones with them. And, you know, I try to convey to them that I'm trying to do what's in the best interest of the company, and that's really what everybody wants at the end of the day, right? So people really gravitated to that, and we quickly bonded, and we had outstanding talent at Blair. I mean, those people built, Blair is the pioneer of direct marketing space, and those people have been there most of their lives. So there was a huge amount of talent. It was an easy thing to do.
Were you accepted?
Absolutely, yes. You know, and I went out and mingled with the community. You know, I joined the local Chamber of Commerce, did outside activities with them. So they really welcomed that. Right. It was a great experience. I never felt that I was not wanted there. There was some risk, obviously, when you start laying people off and all that stuff. But, you know, you face it. I never do that through an email, you know, or a posting. I go out and I talk to them about what we're doing. And I take on questions,
Right.
And you're just upfront about it, so they understand.
Did you share the financials with them?
Yes.
And what impact did that make?
To some people, it was a revelation that the company was in trouble, actually.
Yeah.
So now they knew, and therefore they also knew that some hard decisions had to be made.
There's most senior management, most CEOs watch 2 or 3 or 4 things on a daily basis to kind of gauge, as a dashboard of what how the company's doing. I used to also watch, when I was in manufacturing, watch the employees would gauge how the company's doing by the shipments they made. That was their view of, how many truckloads went out the door was their view of how the company was doing. Not knowing always what the manufacturing costs were or what the profit margin was, or was there a profit margin. What did you watch when you were Blair? What did you look for?
I have this report, I call it Breakfast of Champions. And it's the first thing that I look at every single day, and after that is the Wall Street Journal, right? But it's our daily shipping and orders report. How much did we ship the prior day, and how much in orders did we receive? And most of the time that generates a phone call to someone. Hey, why did we misplan so much? Or, why did we exceed in this particular line? Is there something going on? Mm-hmm. I look at that daily. And it depends on the business that you're in. But in retail, that's a key.
Right. Now, you didn't make anything. You didn't manufacture anything. Is that right?
That is correct. Blair, we sourced everything from third parties. And so we pick, pack, and shipped.
And this was from New York?
From New York. Warren, PA, actually, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Warren, Pennsylvania. Beautiful distribution center, very high-end technology.
Right.
Great.
Other questions anybody have? Yes.
Throughout your career, maybe you had someone who helped you, mentored you about your leadership style or activities or decisions that you made. Was there anyone that you kind of looked it up to?
Yes. Really everybody that I had an opportunity to work with or for, certainly I've learned from all my bosses, and I respect their leadership styles in many ways. Does not mean that I imitate all of it, right? You take the good and you put aside the bad. None of us are perfect. Peers, industry leaders, I read a lot about Roberto Goizueta, Jack Welch. I'm a big fan of Jack's style, and Warren Buffett, who keeps it very real. I learned a lot from those leaders, although I never have worked directly with them, but read a lot about them.
And what were there some people that taught you some bad examples besides the kids that beat you up in South Chicago?
Well, we're in different times today, Jim. Back in the old days, I've had the opportunity to work with very experienced leaders, and a lot of them, some of their style was very authoritative.
Right.
And that worked back in some days, and I think in today's business world, it's better to influence
right.
as opposed to direct. So some of those things I would not replicate. Having a hard discussion with somebody in public,
Right.
it's not something that I like to do. I will have that in behind closed doors.
What would you say your leadership style is? How would you, if I were looking from the outside and evaluating you, how would I classify your leadership style?
I'm big on simplify and execute. Simplicity for me, Jim, maybe because English is my second language, I can't understand all this fancy charts, and just keep it real.
Right.
All the businesses that I work with, Jim, are simple businesses. We're not putting people in Mars here. So I think sometimes we get caught up on, the wrong stuff. So simplify and execute. Hold people accountable. Jim, I am big on that. We can be best friends, but if you're not performing, you will know about it soon.
Yeah, he's already given me an evaluation report. You're doing this as dean. You should do this.
And in the end, especially for our audience here, know your business. Really know your business. Don't get just caught up on the theory. If you've been with a company 2 years, 3 years, and you have not visited the manufacturing facility, there is something wrong. And I would challenge you, go out there. The sooner you get out there, the better. If you can work 8 hours in your manufacturing facility, distribution center, whatever it is, do it.
You talked about, being in the military. You talked about being an accountant with Coopers & Lybrand. You went over to work for Sara Lee. You mentioned Dole along the way. You go to Russell and then to Blair. What's next?
Bill's got me working for free now, so. It's a great question and something that I'm in the midst of trying to figure out, Jim. Certainly, I know I want to give back more to society. I've had an awesome opportunity to do things that I never imagined. I want to give some of that back, Jim. And I'm trying to figure out if the best way to do that is through academics, or go take on another CEO chair somewhere and create employment, pay taxes, etc.
I would recommend that later part and hire all these folks. That's what I think. Could we talk about biggest challenge? We talked about all those companies. You did very well. Obviously, you progressed. You made some impressive moves. What was the biggest challenge along the way, looking backwards?
I would have to say it was the Blair experience. Jim, here's a publicly held company who's losing money. We need to downsize the operation. We need to turn it around fast. In the midst of that, there's a takeover event that happens. We have to do all that while engaging every single worker in the company, the community as well, and then post acquisition, start integrating other businesses into Blair. It was a chance where you put all the theory to work, and it was an experience where, again, I had my fearful moments, right. Very many sleepless nights, a lot of talking with my better half. Am I doing the right thing right. here?
Having lived through some of that personally, I know that that's a huge distracting moment. You're trying to run a company, you're trying to keep everybody focused, you're trying to pay attention to your cash flow and serving your customers, and along comes an offer, and everybody tends to stop what they're doing and look up and wonder what their future's about. How did you manage through that? What did you do?
That was a critical issue for us at Blair. Everybody was worried, right? Are they going to shut down this facility? Because the ramifications of that were going to be huge. Mm-hmm. So the way that we tackled that was get in front of our employees and told them what we knew. I said, look, I cannot guarantee employment for anyone here. I said, not even my job. I said, and most likely my job will be gone.
Right.
I said, so the way that we can guarantee employment for all of us is perform. I said, the owners, the new owners, the people that are buying this business, they're not buying it for the brick and mortar that we have here at the end of the day, right? Anybody can buy machinery, right? They're buying the talent that has made Blair the great brand that it is, made this business the great business that it is, and that is you. Yeah. So continue to do what you do best, and we'll be okay. And, people caught on to that.
That worked, huh?
That worked. That worked. And every time that there was some type of rumor, I would say, okay, meeting. So 30 people in the room, 50 people, whatever the rumor was, kill it. And again, something that helped me a lot was that it was not through an email or a voicemail. You were in front of people, so they could ask you questions. And you got to be blunt. Some questions you're able to answer, and some you just got to say, look, I can't divulge that information. Period. And people understand.
Yeah, they respect you. Questions from the audience? Anybody have anything? Yes.
Do you think there are some difference between, for example, two individuals? One individual that is getting to a leadership position, for example, maybe director of a division, and the other individual like you that reach CEO level. There are some difference in the skills, maybe competencies that make these two individuals one to reach actually to the C level and the other one stay in a leadership position?
Yes, the answer is yes. For some of us, we never get there, right? And other people realize that, this is exactly what I want to do. I want to be a director. I want to be in this leadership role, and I'm content with this. I've had some people criticize me for always wanting to rattle the cage some more. There's never enough, right? And those are the ones that aspire to always do more. So there are some leaders that never get there. You know, we're always after another challenge. And there are some people that early on decide, you know, this is what I want to do. And that's fine. You know, at the end of the day, what I tell people is do what you're passionate about. You know, if you're passionate about that directorship, perfect. Do it. You know, that CEO role, that leadership game is not for everyone. It's not for everyone. I know some people that are very miserable in that job. You know, and I tell them, you know, walk, go do something else. It's not what you're passionate about.
One of the questions we talk about a lot sometimes is not about money. It's not about you know, it's doing what you're doing passionate. What you've done very vigorously. I guess my question is, we talk about work-life balance nowadays. Is there such a thing as work-life balance? Can you really do that as a C-level officer, as a C person? Did you sacrifice your family or along the way from time to time in order to get the job done? And how did you live with that decision?
The answer is yes to all that, Jim. I do believe that there is a balance that you can strike between work and family. Did I sacrifice my family? Absolutely. The answer to that is yes. You know, I missed many events that my daughters had in school or some that I just could not be there. Mm-hmm. But that's a fact of the career that we choose. You know, there has to be a sacrifice, and hopefully your spouse understands that. You know, I've been fortunate in that regard, Jim, but I think we managed through it. There was a great balance. And, you know, companies too, if you're honest with your supervisor, they're lenient. You know, if you got a major event that you got to go to, just tell your supervisor, and most of the time they understand. What I don't recommend is don't hide it. You know, don't say you have a doctor's appointment when you're going to go see your kid play soccer. You know, that's the wrong thing to do.
What roles do you think best positioned you for the CEO suite?
For me, the finance role, the CFO role, because the way I played that role, I had visibility to the entire company. And I would tell our audience here, don't limit yourself by the role, team. You know, make that role be what you want it to be. You know, some people say, I want to be the chief marketing officer, but, you know, I'm only a marketing rep. Well, find a way to get to that CMO through an email, through an idea. Ask to shadow her for a day. Mm-hmm. You know, take on a project, volunteer to do something, get noticed. There are ways to do that. The job description is just a guideline. You know, it's not in stone. And I see lots of good talent sometimes that they're in this box. Right. And I tell them, you know, get out.
We often learn through failure sometimes more than success. Can you point us out a failure? Did you fail somewhere along the way and stumble and learn something from that?
Could spend a week talking about my failures here, Jim. The answer is yes. I made a lot of mistakes and will continue to make mistakes. One of the ones that I laugh about today was as a rookie CFO, I implemented an ERP system. And
that's always easy, I know.
And boy, I spent hours in my team, and they did a phenomenal job, right? We got all this technology and spent lots of money, got invested. But I failed to educate the user. Mm. You know, so all of a sudden we got this great ERP system, right, and our business is tanking. Wait a minute, why? Nobody knows how to use it, and I never bothered to go ask you, the director of operations, Jim, what is it that you really need? How can I help you with this system, right?
We've all lived through that, unfortunately, I think. It's a common business thing. So what was the lesson takeaway from that?
Talk to the user. Before you go out and spend a lot of money on anything, talk to the people that are doing it every day, the people that are, you know, in the factory floor, and say, look, I'm trying to help. How can I best do that? And they'll let you know.
You talked about the fear factor earlier on, and I took from that you thought that fear strengthened you somehow, or so would you encourage people to take risk? Is that something that you found valuable? Did the fear how did that fear hinder you or help you along the way? What did you use that for?
Without a doubt, I would encourage everyone to take on challenging assignments, you know, where you're going to really stare fear in the face. And that's going to build character, courage, strength. It's going to force you to take risks. do it. And especially, you guys are young right now. You can afford to take some hits. The one thing I would advise you against right now is, chasing the money. You're coming out of this great school with a phenomenal MBA, and you're going to take the job that's going to pay the most. Don't do that. That's a mistake. Go after the job that's going to give you the most challenging experience. Go work for the person that you think you're going to learn the most from. Risk-taking is huge, Jim, and I think part of my success I attribute it to that. I've done some things early on that probably a lot of people wouldn't have signed up to do.
Right. Mexico was one of them.
Mexico was one of them. You guys probably, I don't know, you might have been too young, but some of the professors probably remember the maxi devaluation of 1994 that we had. In early 95, I was being shipped out there to go do something with this business. And Jim, I'll be honest with you, I had never dealt with devaluation before. You read an article here and there about it, but going to work in that environment, looking back today, I would pay for that experience. Back in those days, I didn't recognize the experience that I was receiving, but it was just phenomenal.
Right.
Phenomenal.
Right. Intense times we live in right now. We've got lots of things going on. Very difficult unemployment situation. Those are certainly learning environments. Do you see yourself playing a role besides if you don't go the altruistic way? Do you see yourself looking for another CEO role?
Absolutely, and I think I'm getting closer to that decision, Jim, because certainly we are living an economic world today that I never thought we would.
Right.
And I find that fascinating and challenging, Jim. And every now and then we'll get into it with some colleagues. I think we're waiting for somebody to come and wave a magic wand to fix this thing, right? And team, it is you. It's us working together, the ones that are going to make it out of this thing. There's no one else that can come and do this thing. We got ourselves into this mess, right, and we need to get ourselves out.
We have a tradition sort of closing with a bunch of rapid fire questions that you have to answer really quick, But before we get there, I wanted to see if anybody else had a question or two that we might address and make sure we covered those before we move into a closing. Yes?
Yeah, I have a question. Mr. Lopez, as a minority, and how did you conquer the unfamiliar with the English language tradition and networking of the society and successfully to be a leader in America? And what is your motivation?
That's a great question, and I've dealt with some of that, with the discrimination, even my age. Some people think that you're too young to carry the big title. The way I dealt with it, I never really spent that much time with it. Yes, it's out there, you just got to deal with it. I just move forward. So don't spend a lot of time getting caught up in that. You will deal with it. Certainly, I've always tried to work on my language skills. English is my second language. So very early on, I used to buy these tapes and learn a word a day. When I was an auditor and we'd be driving hundreds of miles, I listened to that, and it helped me. Presentation skills are key. I took a course in doing that, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. But those are some of the ways to deal with it. And the driver is, you are as bright as anyone else is here. So if you work hard towards getting that goal that you have defined, you'll get there.
Yes.
I guess partly on that same note, really at all stages of your life, particularly when you're young, you faced disadvantages that currently people in the same situation find unconquerable. And how would you say the people who start off in those disadvantaged positions can see the potential that's out there for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's your internal driver, really. Are you a self-starter? Can you get up every day and motivate yourself? I didn't have a role model. My father, if we wanted to go to school, we went to school. If not, he said, that's your problem.
Right.
So nobody was pushing me. I loved the challenge. And when I found that I could, do what Jim does, it just motivated me more. And you know, if we can somehow if that can be an example to people, that would be great. But I strongly believe that, you know, this country is still the best country in the world. The opportunities are here. If we work hard at them, we'll get them.
I want to ask a series of questions, and if you could, you know, let's try to answer these precisely, if you might. Who taught you the most?
My father.
Your favorite leadership book?
Straight from the Gut, Jack Welch.
Your least favorite leadership buzzword?
Least favorite.
Least favorite.
You know, English is my second language, Jim, so.
You know, you could do this one in Spanish and really impress us all. So.
I was in a group of folks the other day, and somebody was referred to me as a thought leader. And I don't like that buzzword.
Okay.
Because I don't know what it means. So.
Your boss's pick one, biggest complaint about you?
Never enough.
Now explain that one.
You know, if we closed the deal, I was on to the next one.
Okay.
If we had an issue about, you know, I didn't get enough stock options, you know,
Yeah.
we would have a conversation on it, you know. So it was like, Al, it's never enough for you, you know.
I often find our spouses are our most honest partners and really reflect us in their eyes. Your spouse's biggest complaint about you?
Lack of hair. No.
Well, did you have long wavy hair at one time in your life we don't know about?
Believe it or not, yes. I'm too strict. I think that's what she would say. You know, I at times she has to remind me that I'm not in the CEO chair at home.
Yeah, they do that very well, usually.
Yes.
Piece of advice that you would leave our students with today, looking back?
I think I said this earlier. Go after a challenging opportunity, please. You know, don't chase the money today. That will come. What will benefit you the most, in my experience, is the challenging task. You know, step outside your comfort zone. Go work abroad in a culture that you don't understand, with a language that's not yours. It'll pay back for you huge. I mean, you learn how to engage your audience. It's a phenomenal experience. I highly recommend that.
I want to thank you for your time today. Welcome back
Thank
to
you, Jim.
Owen, and
Appreciate it.
welcome home.